It's NZ girl, not New Zealand girl, and you should really know the difference. Actually, you probably don't want to know the difference, but one's a brothel, one's not, and and I'm not on the brothel end. It's a shame, though. So basically, thanks everyone very much for being awake. Actually, I know it's really hard after a long day of listening to people. Full credit, and I'm basically not above bribery. So question and answers at the end, and I'm going to throw a case of cider, whoever comes up, well, I won't throw it at you, but you know what I mean. I will give a case of cider to whoever comes up with the most curliest question possible. And I want a curly question, and I guess the reason for this is because, a group of audience like you guys today, and I've scanned through the guest list, is that you're a real mixed bunch. So it's really hard to figure out exactly where to pitch in terms of knowledge. So, if there's any of you going to sit there and go, yeah, you're teaching me how to suck eggs, that's cool. So I definitely invite you at the end to throw some really curlies at me. I have been in this space for more than 17 years, which is more than half my life, which is an exceptionally long time. And I reckon, and I often liken it to dog years. So it feels more like 70 or so. So be warned, what I do is more about big picture thinking. I'm a strategist by nature. And I really think about where we're going and how we're getting there. I'll leave the conversion funnel tactics to the experts. Though I've got lots of cool case studies, and I'm more than happy to share them offline. So basically, I look at it from a customer point of view. I look at where the pain is, and I look at how we create products and services that really make life easier for ourselves. So, 5 simple steps to digital domination. Did I say that? It sounds a bit impossible, really, doesn't it? But I actually meant it. The definition of simple is easy to understand. And I actually think that digital inherently is easy to understand. I didn't say it wasn't hard, work, that is, and that you wouldn't just be able to do it and check digital off your list like lots of people would like to be able to do. The reality is that digital domination really takes an investment in innovation and change. And I know you guys have heard that all day, so it's really nice to be able to have that backed up. But that can be really hard for some people. And more importantly, it can be really hard for some companies. And I know that the companies that you guys work for, are really struggling to understand how to actually really inject it into the business. And despite its sheer enormity, the digital world is actually a pretty simple proposition. And I think my own personal story is a pretty interesting testimony to that. And let's just get a quick reality check off that. It's all well and good for me to stand up here and say digital domination is easy. I've come from the digital era, probably born clutching an iPhone, right? But the reality is I wasn't. At the end of the day, I'm not really any different from you guys. I wasn't born in this era. My first real internet experience involved a CompuServe and downloading email at about 3 every 5 hours. My first computer was an Amstrad. So we're going back a hell of a long time, and it wasn't inherent, it wasn't second nature. If you add to that, you're all far more qualified than I am. I've never sat an exam in my entire life. I'll try not to rub that in. So, when I take you through these 5 simple steps that I believe that you need to really take on board, try to remember that I started digital as a high school dropout. I launched NZ Girl in my spare bedroom on a second-hand computer, which took about 25 minutes to boot up. I had absolutely no business experience, no industry experience. I had no idea how to run a magazine, a publication, or anything whatsoever. I didn't know how to manage staff, any of the bits and pieces that are required. Yet, despite all that, 13 years later, I'm still here. That in itself is quite an achievement, I have to say, because it's been a hell of a ride. We've got 100,000 members, and last month alone we had 153,000 people come in total to our site. There's 27,000 pages in our archive. And 12 weeks ago, I launched my 5th online business as an Exceed, Flossie.com, quiet time appointments website. So how did I manage to do all that, given my background? And I think I managed to do it because the world's changing. And here's the clincher. I'm okay with it. I actually would go as far to say is that I thrive on change. And Nick, this is a bit when I tell you the fact that I've had 2 husbands and on to my 3rd. So it really does demonstrate the fact that I'm okay with change. See, I told you I'm quite open-minded. And I believe that that's really fueled alongside that we're creating content, consuming content, and sharing content in a completely different way today. And that has really afforded me unique opportunities to play in a space that ordinarily, in any other industry, with my lack of education and my lack of experience, I wouldn't be doing anything at all. Over the last decade, economies have really tightened, budgets have shrunk, and marketers have become increasingly reliant on the audience to actually do the marketing grunt work. And so that's really thrust digital forward. So I've got some compelling examples I want to share with you today, which are brands that I've worked on. And you know, I think that they sum up these 5 key points. When I sat down, I thought about what do you guys want to get out of today. These are the things that I sort of thought you might like. So really my goal for you, being also the last speaker of the day, is to walk away feeling inspired. And that you're, you know, I know you're part of the revolution, but really getting in amongst it. So let's get started. 5 simple steps. Oops, sorry. Spilling all over myself. So basically, my first one is get on board. And really, the concept of social media is kind of laughable. You know, the whole reason why the internet was created was for developers to be able to share code. So sharing has really been at the basis of it from the very get-go. So really, from my point of view, what I want you to be able to get your head around is committing to not just being in social media. And I got briefed in by a client this morning who wanted to talk about their social media strategy. They don't have any digital strategy. They don't have anything that's bringing that entire business together. So I really, you know, coach them to understand that it's about committing to an evolution of change, committing that it's going to be central to your business development. And so, you know, basically the world is changing, the train is leaving, and you need to be on it. And I know you guys get sold on this all the time. And, you know, I know most of you are already on the train, or at least standing at the platform, looking at the train, which is, you know, probably a nice starting point. And often it's higher up the food chain where you're getting held back. You know, number one frustration I get from clients, is, particularly in corporates, is from their bosses who just can't get their head around it, or from their legal teams who are really stopping you from boarding the train. You know, your job, though, as a marketer, is to not to do this half-assed. Not just to pay lip service to doing this. You know, not just to accept the legalities are the reason why you shouldn't be doing this. You know, not just to accept the ordinary or the mediocre, or any other, you know, half-assed way of going about it. Your job is to push to the front of the train to be in first class, not just rounding up the rear. Kind of enough on the train analogies, but you know, really don't get it just being sucked into being about one thing. I hate to tell you guys, often marketers are magpies. Don't know if you've worked this one out yourselves, but you know, they're a nice new shiny thing, like to go after it. And I've watched that for years, and it's been really frustrating when it's been one thing, and then it's been the next thing, and then it's been the next thing, as opposed to kind of pulling them all together and working out how they all come in as part of your entire strategy, because they're all important. And digital is more than just about a call to action or an immediate sale. It's more than just about doing Facebook. You know, it's about using the digital world to really change the way you think about manufacturing, research, product development, recruitment, as well as customer relationships, brand positioning, and sales. And it's easy, I understand, as marketers to go for the low-hanging fruit because you've got to be able to drive that return on investment to get your foot in the door in the first place, to get your bosses to want to allow you to do more at all. But you know, they're going to ask you the first question of why should I? And the greatest fears and concerns I hear from people is about putting themselves out there at all and sticking their necks out, being scared of failure. Well, you guys know the adage, fortune favours the brave, and new ground isn't broken by those who are scared of sticking their necks out. The reality is, it's new for everyone. That's a fact. It's new for me. 17 years later, I still find it new every single day. Failure is not trying. Failure is putting too many rules around it and worrying about every outcome. You cannot control every outcome. Failure is letting that legal team dictate the worst case scenario and making that stop you from moving forward. Failure is trying to fit your traditional marketing thinking into digital solutions. You know, after all, the definition of innovation is to do something first. And it pays to really remember that. You know, being first can often be really, really scary. And you know, for some people, it feels akin to really setting yourself up for ridicule or failure. And if any of you have watched Brené Brown's TED Talk, which I just absolutely adore, and at the heart of it being vulnerability is the birthplace of both shame and innovation. And it's a really interesting thought to take into this. You know, this is a new world, and being brave is actually critical to your success. It's integral. So employ smart people who are really adaptable and unafraid of change. They're otherwise known as Gen Ys. They really want to be at the forefront of this. They're okay with putting themselves out there. And they pretty much are born clutching smartphones. My 5-year-old stepdaughter has just recently taught my father how to use his iPhone. He was really humiliated. And you can imagine for him how scary that would have been. But I'm just really proud of the fact that he even got one in the first place. So these kids are desperate to be rule breakers and world owners. They want to go out there and do it. But what the funny thing is even if you're not that demographic, you've got one thing over them, and that is a basis in business and marketing principles that apply to absolutely everything that we do. And that digital is just the channel. And that it's, your knowledge in business and marketing supersedes your knowledge in digital any day of the week. And as long as you're still willing to learn, then you'll be fine. And that's probably the biggest secret I can probably impart in what we do, is at the base of everything are those principles. And you really need to know who you are and understand what role you play in people's lives, and figure out how you can fix that pain. Trends come and go, new things are developed all the time, channels evolve. Nobody knows it all. And we're all ingesting just what we can. So for those of you sitting there thinking, yeah, get on the track, get over it, we know this, move on, let me give you something to chew on. Of the 50 marketing agencies and clients that I work with, only 12 of them are doing digital at the moment. And most of them aren't doing it because it's too hard, we don't have the budget, we haven't sorted out our strategy, the legal team don't know how to move forward, we're not sure where to start. These are the same discussions I had back in 1999 when I started NZ Girl, and I can tell you that is incredibly frustrating. So that in mind, fix the pain is my second point. And I spent a lot of time thinking about all sorts of things. I at times consider myself a little bit of a navel gazer. And I make a point of taking myself out of the everyday, and I just draw great, wrong things, thanks. Draw great big, charts of how they all interconnect, and I really get back down to basics because it really is the basics that count. And I, believe use is so often forgotten with people, and our inability to answer what the inherent usefulness of something is because we get too close to the product or we're too sentimental about it. I find often that clients are building solutions without any purpose or lacking any application. And it is that old adage of just doing it for the sake of doing it. And they're trying to figure out how to put their brand in there. And, I like to ask that simple question, how does it change a person's life? Where is the pain? And don't get confused about the scope of change that's required, because often it's the subtlest change that makes the most difference in somebody's life. Small, positive differences. And you provide as much value by being as useful and as helpful as possible, and the rewards will come. Digital is the perfect platform for this. Your ability to connect with your consumers, and ask them questions, and receive feedback, and adapt your product is like nothing we've ever had before. Adapting those principles into your entire business is what will set you apart from those competitors. Taking this information and turning it into something useful is the interesting path I think that we're on with technology today. My view is basically if you can think of it, there can be an app for it. I'm my chief technology officer's worst nightmare because I sell things in all the time before we build them. But that's the reality. And in our household, if I take an example, the kids brush their teeth to the Colgate Tooth Fairy app. Genius, such a simple app that when I first looked at it, I went, it can't be that exciting. You get a point every time you brush your teeth. The kids go, we get a point, and they love it, and they brush their teeth. We have the chore app, and they go through, and every week they get 5 cents for everything they've done. And so they add it up, and they put their money out there. I don't get why the banks aren't getting behind that. That's how you engage the kids nowadays. The reality is, in amongst the billion-plus apps that we've got available to download, it's completely and utterly mind-boggling what we can do. But the scary fact is that research tells us that we use 4 of them. We get all over excited when we get a new iPhone and we download everything under the sun, all sorts of weird and wonderful things that you can do, and then we dwindle it down to 4. That really proves to me that novelty is nothing and usefulness is everything. So whilst the breadth and the depth of the internet is completely and utterly overwhelmingly mind-boggling, at the end of the day, we're still humans that have a limited amount of time. We still crave things to be really simple, to be made really easy for us to use and understand. So my advice is this. As I stated before, it's crucial for you to understand what your brand is about, what your rational, functional, emotional needs and benefits are. Here's one of the things that I use for just simple planning. If you know what you are and know what you stand for, your strategy for communication across digital will really unfold. In fact, as new technologies and platforms evolve, you'll be able to use this as a guide to be able to work out how you should get into it as well, as opposed to freaking out and knowing no one's doing that as yet. And it really comes back down to understanding the goal. What's the customer goal? And you've got to ask yourself this question. Are you able to easily answer that? Or is it buried underneath 5, 10 pages of strategies and documentation? Particularly you big corporates I'm pointing at. You guys are synonymous with lots of charts. Are you able to answer that question? What's our use? Why are we here and what do we do? Remember that technology is often just the vehicle. It's about making people's lives easier because we are in a cluttered, crazy, chaotic world. And computing isn't about computers any longer. And I think Steve Jobs really understood that. And that's how he created a $100 billion slush fund. So here's kind of an overview of the approach I take to creating business concepts. They're not rocket science. They're really basic. And, but they work for me. And it's all really centered around listening to the customer. And every step we take embraces that and brings it back to the customer in our thinking. So it's really simple. And I think simplicity works, and it shouldn't be forgotten. Here's an example I want to show you guys on Old Moot Cider. Old Moot Cider is my partner Scotty's company, and he got me involved in being able to help build the brand a couple of years ago. So, we really got back down to basics and asked, when someone is at that moment of truth when they're standing at the supermarket and they're trying to decide, what to take home, how do you make sure that you're the beverage that they choose? And what I love what these guys have done is that they've really embraced digital into every aspect of their business, including development, manufacturing, and all the way, obviously, through marketing. And it's given them a really cost-effective, competitive edge on their in the category. Most importantly, they've embraced being an entrepreneurial business. And I think that's actually one of the key pillars to digital, and is being entrepreneurial. And it's, for them, a real differentiation when all their competitors are big breweries. And that they, who are by nature not nimble or easily movable, these guys can be. And I think as an aside, think back to the 90s when the Ma and Pa retailer basically got nailed by the big guy. This is this era we're coming through now where the little guy can use digital to build a bigger brand than the big guy. And the big guy learns new tricks. So with this diagram, I wanted to really understand what led people to buy cider in the first place. And I developed that consumer map of who drinks it, and when they drink it, why they drink it, what their motivations are. I asked lots of questions, really simple things. We turned to Twitter and to Facebook and to SurveyMonkey and to different forums and websites. And what we learned was that people who love cider love cider. They really, really get into it, and they tell all their mates about how much they love cider. They're not second-rate consuming citizens because they don't like beer or wine. They just, by choice, love cider. And what was really interesting for us is that they're also really heavy social media users, which was rather convenient. And so with that in mind, we created a platform where they could easily share that love of cider, and we made it simple for them to want to keep fueling that. So instead of just giving them a box of cider to look at, we would give them caseloads and ask them to create cider Sunday sessions and pass them on to their friends. And those social media platforms for us have really driven regular interactions, and we've helped develop groups to trial new flavours. We've decided via Twitter, based on what's the new flavours and variants are going to come out. We've hired staff off the back of it, participation in events, and our virtual Cider Sunday sessions, which is a relatively simple concept about bringing your friends together around sharing a cider and having a hand of cards. And we've brought this to life in various bars and pubs across Australia. And that's easy to do in Aussie, but in New Zealand we don't have that luxury. Basically the bar market's owned either by Lion or DB, and which has traditionally been the path of which people trial new products to buy at the supermarket. So we've had to find other ways. So recommendation has been absolutely critical to us to build this brand. Very little has been spent in other marketing. We supported the Cider Lovers Club on radio and billboards briefly. It probably backed up a lot of what we'd been doing, and I think, if anything, helped the influencers who discovered the brand first to feel like they were discoverers, so they could turn to their friends and go, I told you guys about this ages ago. So really help with that, moving towards that tipping point. And the results have been absolutely phenomenal. And I tell you, credit given where due, you know, Scotty's a really well-behaved client. And not just because he has to be, but actually he does what's been recommended to him. He embraces new things, and he's not scared, and he totally gets it. This is not his space. He doesn't understand it, so he hires people who do, and he doesn't overanalyze it. He says, if it's going to work, I'm going to give it a go. And they give things a go. Some things work, and some things don't, and they move on. And we've built up an impressive following. We've got 16,500 fans in our Old Moot Cider Facebook, which we did in less than a month. Does help when you give away a lot of cider. And you know, we're obviously trying lots of different things as well. We've just started moving into Pinterest. But you know what the most interesting thing is? That our most successful engagement is our email marketing. So all our research basically condenses into this. You know, it's a really simple guide for the Old Moot Cider team to keep, and it really is the communication that they internally can have. Because it wasn't for them just about employing a social media expert or a digital strategist who came in and did this part for them. They wanted it to be a cultural change. So they made the change that every single person in the entire business was taught how to use Twitter, would understand how to engage in Facebook. And so that it became a really critical part of their business. And I think when you talk about, you know, the 101 of social media strategy is to be authentic, that's about the only way you can really get there. And they all understand who they are. I really understand that that's quite difficult for corporates to get their head around, because I think, you know, where it's difficult to achieve is so much of what's entrenched in your company is about how you perceive your brand to be. And the reality is it often is quite separate from how your consumers perceive your brand to be. And I think that's where often people get unstuck, because you're going to get called out in digital if you try to go down your path as opposed to their path. I don't necessarily know all the answers to that one, but I do know that you know, if you try to not answer that before you go down this path, you may come across as quite disingenuous. I think one of the best things we did with the Old Moot Cider brand was build a personality around it that we really carefully constructed. You know, we really thought about its history. This brand, you know, came from 1947. It's entrenched in Scrumpy Hands. If you ever played that game, anyone? Yeah. So you know, it's had a moonshine kind of background. So when I visualised who this person was and what he's about, those things had to kind of come into it. And the funny thing is, it's actually a combination of both Scotty and his business partner, Just. So it's really relatable, really authentic and believable. And I think believable is completely comes back down to the consistency of being able to stand behind that. You know, essentially what we created with Old Moot Cider was a #1 fan strategy, and I'm a big fan of that. And dare I mention it, I feel like it's one of those kind of elephants in the room that no one wants to talk about anymore. No one wants to be the uncool person that mentions Coney. But setting aside the obvious fallout that came after about day 5, there's something about this campaign that I think is really fascinating, and that's, you know, 80 million people viewed this video in the first 5 days. 80 million. That's just an extraordinary number. You know, what was it about it that spread it so fast? Sure, you know, your ability to quickly feel like you were a part of something by checking a box effectively, sharing it with your friends, so you could check and move on. But what was at the bottom of it, which I thought was interesting, was 1,000 passionate people, as crazy as the first guy. They were all completely and utterly mad for their cause. And these guys were going to spread the word no matter what. And you can't spread anything without having your #1 fans at the base of it. And the presentations I've heard today, you've all come back to #1 fan strategy. So we followed that with Old Moot Cider. And in the results, I know you probably wanted me to say that before, is that now Old Moot Cider is the #1 cider in the country. We're the only non-brewery in the top 10, and we're growing at more than double the category. So digital is at the base of that. So I think oftentimes finding your #1 fans can be easier said than it is done. And it can be a lot of hard work, but I think we're in a better position today to do it than we've ever been before. At NZ Girl, we've developed an influencer program, which I think is quite cool. There's, you know, lots of influencer programs out there, but ours is, I think, a little bit different. And it's a little bit more like brand dating. And what we do is we find the exact target market to match with a campaign. So we might get briefed on we're trying to reach 25-year-old females who live in Auckland who like getting their hair done, that kind of idea. And we will go in and we will find exactly those people Because the people who we interact with, we've already interviewed, we've surveyed, we've asked them questions, we've found out what the brands they're into, and we're able to pull the two of them together. And then effectively what we do is just we introduce them to something that we know that they're more likely to like. And so the key for us at that point is to make it really easy for them to participate in it. So we give them some really fun tools which might help them create different pieces of content like recipes or videos or montages of products put together. We've built all these tools which make it really simple for them to do. And then they basically share it across their networks of sites that they work on. So they're not incentivized to write anything in particular. We're on NZ Girl all about sharing, creating, finding, sharing your favorite things. So we do tend to lend to a positive attitude anyhow. And they're only incentivized on terms of sharing. So basically whoever can get the most people to read your articles or comment and all the rest of it. But obviously within the rules that we're allowed to. And this method means that we're more likely to reach people who actually really like it, as opposed to just doing it for the sake of doing it. So I think also as the brand owners that we deal with on these, what's really good for them is that they have content then to put through their Facebook page of real content that people like and will actually engage with. So I think number one, fans are really critical to your survival online, and creating that really truly engaged content is a first step. Then finding your target audience is your second, and then they'll introduce you to other people, which is the natural third. Like basically finds like. So essentially, if you break it down, what I've just described, it's word of mouth. Nothing new about that. Nothing overly exciting. In fact, it's the oldest marketing term in the book. What I, think, really getting excited about now is that when we love and like or hate things nowadays, that when we tell people, it happens globally, quickly, and en masse. So that in itself is the exciting time that we move into. And if you take into consideration these three things, one is the number one way in which we purchase things nowadays is based on friend recommendation. And that's a fact. It's highly well researched. And the average number of individual fans we have on Facebook is 130. Now that's just on the average. I know with our NZ Girl audience, it sits at about 300. And as high as 700. I don't know about you guys, I personally just cannot manage that many friends. It's my own rules that I fit within. But, the younger generation, they certainly have a much more open approach to it. And, the research into it basically says that they keep a group of non-friends and that they're there to serve an audience purpose, so that when you do a status update, you kind of feel like you have people to say it to and who can feed back and tell you you're doing good things in your life. So if you consider that your network contacts are also considered your friends, then the people that we consider trusted sources has really widened. And I think now if you take into consideration how hard it is to find what you're looking for on Google, and I know I'm not alone on this, and it is because there is so much manipulation of Google, and I understand that they're trying to crack down on this, but nonetheless it is very difficult. And how often do you just not click next page? How often do you actually end up turning to the lazy web and asking your friends, be it via Twitter or Facebook? I know we certainly do all the time. So basically, if you think about that, then influence is the key. The people who we trust are directing what we see, what we buy, what we like. They're filtering our content. And they're also getting invites to the best parties in town. They're given free drinks to try, restaurants to go to, clothes to wear, places to visit. Every single day of the week, we get asked to help find influencers to connect new products to. Because brands have really recognised that influencers are no longer magazine editors. They're everyday people. They're you. They're me. And as I say to people, next time you poo-poo the point of Twitter, consider that in the future, the size of your network will be as important as your education. I actually think it already is. In fact, this year alone, I've hired 5 people from meeting off Twitter. And I don't think this needn't be an environment that's just for individuals or wannabe Kim Kardashians. Although I am quite quick to point out that the person who dismisses the Kardashian trend should probably stop and think for a minute, because what they've created is pretty phenomenal, and it all comes down to digital. They've carefully constructed an incredibly powerful brand that sells hundreds of millions of dollars of merchandise every year. And if there was ever an example of reputation management, filling a sales pipeline through careful management and positioning of a brand around the American psyche, Kim's would be it. And as everyone all rightly points out, it's not like they had talent to back it up. They did this from scratch. And they played on an angle. And they played off basically that we buy into a culture that's obsessed with how the other half lives. And Twitter and social media as a whole are at the base of that. A populace that increasingly looks for validation and comfort and security. And as shallow as it might seem, celebrities often fill this void for us. They help alleviate our own fears on an everyday basis. Kind of frightening, isn't it? But it's true. That aside, Kim recently was one of the startup investors in TrueDazzle.com, which has just had $40 million in VC in San Fran. So I think there's some brains behind that too. So basically the changes that are happening in the content creation market, I think will be the biggest changes that we see over the next few years. I think any publisher that's still trying to work off traditional advertising revenue as to support content creation will not be a business in the next 2 to 5 years. And I'll give you a little bit of my own story on this to kind of give it context. Go back to 1999 when we started NZ Girl. As I said, 21. I started with a gap, and I knew that basically there was an opportunity to provide a more fast-paced, up-to-date, free magazine online that was filled with content that girls from New Zealand would like. At that stage, there was Australian print magazines with a token page New Zealand content. And I really researched who my audience was, and I look back at it and I kind of laugh because it was kind of cute. We didn't have Facebook. We were pre-Google. So I walked down my street and I knocked on doors, and I said, have you got any daughters? Do you think they might be interested in a focus group? It must have been infinitely cute for the mothers of these daughters to watch. And I sat down in groups with them and asked them, what was missing in their life and how they'd like to connect with others, because I got that online was a place where you could actually build this personality and be okay with the world in a way that was different from a face-to-face conversation. And so, then I drew this big mind map of what I wanted to look like and how it could work and what I wanted people to get out of it. And I formed this view, and this view itself remains to this day. And that was if I got the content right, the audience would come. And if the audience came, the advertising would follow. And I made that my biggest priority. I cannot tell you why I thought that was what drove me to come to that conclusion, other than the fact that I talked to my customers and I listened to them and I use it as the basis of creation. And I think that's the only reason why we still exist today. For lots of good reasons, 13 years later, we shouldn't be here. I've been through 2 recessions. Everybody put their money into Facebook a couple of years ago, so I've had to work really, really hard to get onto any schedules. So, that same basis is what's helping us evolve now as well, because that original gap that we started with is gone. It's over. There's no lack of content in this market any longer. I was nearly crucified back in 2009 when I exited Flossie Media Group's ad network out of Australia, and particularly out of selling display advertising, because I dare to suggest that the display ad was on its deathbed. And I stand by that. It is dying, and anyone who's still trying to hold on to it as a way in which to make money is going to die with it. And I guess the question that should really be posed at that point is if online is so amazing, why is the display ad dying? And I think this basically is my view of how that's happened, and I think the journey of evolvement really goes to show what displays like, what the digital world is like. When I started NZ Girl in the beginning, brands were really slow to get on board. You can imagine knocking on the door back in '99 and saying, you should get into online. And they look at me and go, what's that? And I went, okay, cool. And credit I'm going to give to is Johnson & Johnson, our first brand that came on board before we even launched the site. I'm really proud of those guys. They're just, they handed over a big $1,500 check, and I thought I was absolutely rolling in it. We were so excited. And, it was brilliant that brands back then, could get it. But most sat back and watched and waited. And, a few years went on and we continued to push down this path. We were really lucky with the investments that we got on board, people that gave real credibility to what we were doing. And so, that went on for a few years. And then the agencies basically ignored us, and so we kept going direct to the marketing managers who, basically were more interested and engaged. We kept massaging the agencies as we could, and then the agencies got on board. And of course, then it became how big everything could get. So the ads got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it was all about homepage takeovers and big banners, and everything got a logo stuck on it. And then it was all about search. And then it was all about the click-through, and they over-measured the hell out of everything. And then the bottom fell out of the advertising market, and basically as that happened, everybody dropped their pants, and the CPM was left in tatters. And that basically happened at the same time as user-generated content and social media started to explode. And when your grandma starts getting into Facebook, the whole thing basically changes. And what became a marketing coin term became basically the normality. And then everybody got a blog. Every man and his dog got a blog. Most often or not, the dog's blog was more amusing than the man's. But what we ended up with a plethora of ad impressions, and that's why basically the need for content changed. So networks created really good targeting, and everything came on international eyeballs, and everything got cheap, cheap, cheap. And portals and publishers really started trying to compete with us on pricing, so they dropped their pants. And everybody, we took a CPM dive from $65 down to, 60 cents and less. And so when all this happened and advertising budgets got pulled and CPMs dropped even further, they sunk down permanently. And that's why we're now at this place where publishers, are really struggling to create quality content. And I totally and truly and utterly believe that this is one of the key reasons why we have shoddy journalism today. And it's because it is really difficult to justify building quality content, and so everybody is after getting the sensationalism to make sure they get the audience. And I don't blame you as marketers. Put things in front of you that are cheap, you're going to take the cheap options. We did it to ourselves as publishers. But everything's had been about the ROI, an immediate ROI. There was no room for customer journeys or frequency tracking or understanding what leads to that moment of truth. No one was thinking through, if I do this now, how long before they purchase? How many other touch points may happen? How many other ways may they interact? So what I think will happen next is that content discovery will increasingly happen via our friends. And I'll go more into this in a moment. We also come back, I think, to the brands that we trust. When digital and TV mash up and become our one big platform, the content explosion is really going to be quite overwhelming. So we're going to turn to the brands that we trust to find the content. And publisher brands who've developed a reputation of anchoring an audience and embrace video will actually survive. The TVC is still popular for a reason because it actually works. A good TVC always works. It's just that the channel it works on isn't quite so good anymore. So there really is going to be some radical change in that space, and pricing obviously is going to change, which is a really good thing for brands. Integrated advertising, I think, is going to be essential to our cut-through, and CRMs that really collect good data about who, what, when, how, and why are really going to be able to deliver a much richer content experience. And then display will have a reason for being again. One of the ideas we've been playing around with on NZ Girl is the idea of the piece of content that's created can be basically picked up and taken somewhere else, and the ad goes with it. And I know the New York Times is trialling this on a product called Ricochet. So I'll be really interested to see how that actually works. Because when we talk to brands nowadays, we don't necessarily want them to just go, hey, we'll just create it on NZ Girl. We want them to create it across lots of different places. And if we can help them do that, then potentially we have a much stronger point of difference. And basically, so investment in content, I think, is going to be increasingly important. Now you're going to watch me really wing it because half my notes have just gone missing. I have no idea where they are, so this should be interesting. Thankfully, I know what I've put it up here. So one of the things for creating, for us, the next steps is really a changing from being an online magazine. I made a call about 18 months ago, which was if we stay as an online magazine, we will die. So we've moved towards being a social magazine. And it's not just done now because we want to or because social's cool. It's actually done because this is where our audience is moving. And it took pretty much 18 months worth of strategizing to get to this point. And the concept really is that, at the end of the day, our audience, who are predominantly 18 to 35-year-old women, are creating content themselves. And at the moment, they're using blogs, from WordPress to all sorts of, lots and lots of different blog sites you can use. But the content that's created out of those is quite generic and relatively homemade looking. And so what we said was there was a nice opportunity there for us to enable them to make really good looking content, and that we would be the starting point for when they wanted to put this content on other places. So on the left-hand side here, there is a form, one of the forms of about 12 different ones that you can use, and anybody can come in and create content on our site. And you can upload, a recipe here. And this is all built with Google recipes in mind. So as you can see, we've got metrics of 1.5 cups of sugar. Those are really important to be on Google's recipes index. And they put it in like that, and it pops out like the one on the right. And it's, it's a really easy way. And this is a WordPress site. This is a WordPress plugin that we've optimized. NZ Girl is completely built on WordPress. And it does mean the content looks great, and then they share it with their audiences. 95% of our content is created by our audience now. We only create 5% of it. That's an enormous shift. And basically, in the 5% we do create, is really about us leading the way. And us saying, here's what, what we like. And it kind of sets the tone, and then they create from there. So I employ an engagement pyramid, and effectively, I know you guys have all seen this before, but it's really important to think about that change that we've made, is understanding that, and obviously in every society, you have the different levels of people and the willingness to engage. And you've got to accept the fact that the vast majority of people really can't be bothered. And so you've got to make it so that the people at the top, whatever they're doing, and the people at the bottom get to enjoy. And so we introduced something called karma points. And the karma points really enable content to be seen that's good. So it wasn't just about who had the most likes or comments or tweets or retweets or whatever else. It was also about how useful that content is and how many people were actually wanting to read it and how long they were reading it for and all that kind of stuff. So we employed some really interesting metrics, and that effectively feeds where the content shows on the site. And so what our role is within this now is to be the curator. We're no longer the creator, we're just the curator. And our job is to make sure we provide them with the really cool, useful tools that enable them to use Pinterest, enable them to use Facebook, etc. As you know, 90% of pins on Pinterest are repins. So, everyone is creating the content somewhere else and then putting it into that place, and that's where we want NZ Girl to fall into. One of the other cool things we've done is putting in Facebook Connect. Now, obviously, social plugin, I like to call it the universal login, because it makes life easier. I don't even remember my own passwords on NZ Girl. I can remember my Facebook ones, so it kind of makes sense. Roughly about 20% of the audience are using this at the moment, and I think that will grow significantly, and it does with the new members. But what's interesting about it, of course, is that, as what I was saying before about filtering that content, the content on the site that you see is filtered based on your Facebook friends. So that's going to be the first order of priority it comes up on. And the guys who do that really well are Pinterest. So when you do come in here and you are logged in, you are going to see it via your friends, the people that you follow first. And this, I think, is really interesting explosion of where content's going to change. And, again, maybe I'm teaching you suck eggs and you guys all know this, but it's really fascinating where it's going to go. And I think it pays to think about what that's going to mean ongoing. If you look at the Wall Street Journal and the way they use the social reader and how you can see on Facebook your friends just read this article. And, more often than not, you actually quite like the article yourself, so you click on it. So because, they get the fact that like attracts like. And it really does work. And we've certainly seen those page impressions have grown significantly as a result. I love the visual search phenomenon, and I think we're going to see some significant changes in Google as a result of the way that these guys are proving the fact that women, we are magpies and we're okay with it. And we've put visual search into NZ Girl, into the stream and also the search stream, and it works so much better. Here's an example of how we've used Pinterest for Old Moot Cider, where we created a platform where you could create rules for card games. So we made physical cards, like playing cards, and give them out to the Cider Lovers Club, which is about 5,000 people in the Cider Lovers Club. And so basically, come create card games that you can share with your friends. And it's one that's come up here. So then, obviously, from a search point of view, organically, people, when they're looking for the rules for how to play gin or shithead or whatever else it might be, they will come up with Old Moot Cider at that time. And that's that kind of content creation really creates the online footprint for us that isn't just a one-off campaign, but actually continues to grow and build over a period of time. So basically, consistency and perseverance is really my fifth and final point. And I think Google have a really interesting example in here, where they you know, if anyone could be complacent, it'll be Google. You know, you've got the most amount of money, you get to sit back you know, as much as you like, really, and that's kind of in the past how, you know, the big corporates have worked. But what I love is that these guys have gone, nah, stuff that, now let's take on traditional and nail it. And obviously the the Google-owned YouTube, $100 million investment that's going into IPTV, 100 new channels that they're creating, and they're trawling the net for talent. And Hollywood are partnering with them, and it's a really interesting time. Because you remember that phase we went through where all the movies were all book adaptations because the movie houses wanted to feel confident that there would be an audience that would already go with it. The same thing basically applying now from an online point of view, that they're going through YouTube, they're going through Twitter, they're trying to find the stars. They're trying to find the next Justin Bieber, you know, who started obviously in YouTube. And one really interesting quote I came across was a director who was interviewing at a casting, and you know, he said, "Oh, you know, she's gorgeous and she's, you know, got all the parts, and you know, she can act, I think, and all the rest of it. But is she a YouTube or a Twitter girl?" And the response of 43,000 YouTube subscribers and just as many Twitter followers basically clinched her the part in a brand new Tom Hanks web-only TV series. And so, you know, that whole new, you know, audience and recruitment and finding people, I think, talent management is a really interesting future coming into here. And just everyday people. So, you know, these guys have really understood that their commitment to involvement and change is fundamental. And, you know, that if there's ever a time where things are going to change, it's now. The mashup between television and digital is just going to blow everybody's minds completely. And it's not that far away. You know, the sets are already available. I know it takes a bit longer for things to get to New Zealand, but this one will come faster than before. So finally on Flossie.com, which we just relaunched in February, as I said, as a quiet time appointments website, you know, we've really taken consistency and perseverance as a pillar. Basically what we want to create with the brand is a customer journey that they feel a part of. So every step of the way, they hear from me, they hear from the other staff and the team who are just as passionate as I am for what we're trying to create. And they feed back to us things like, oh wow, it's really cool to see this grow and see you guys get coverage here and coverage there. And that's how we're creating our #1 fan strategy, is that we're bringing in this group of people at the beginning who get to find out about it like it's a secret club and make sure that they feel indoctrinated, and we go into the offices and we give them things to give to other people so that they feel like they can do the introduction and they can be the influencer. And absolutely every single time works brilliantly. And we are building it very slowly, but the key for us is going to be when we go into our phase 2, where we put the accelerator on and really try and ramp this thing up, is by trying to keep that kind of strategy going within the business. So, you know, really at the base of all this for me, change is the one constant. I, you know, liken myself to a bit of a chameleon. I have constantly changed the businesses and evolved them over the years. You know, it's just part of what you have to do. If you sit still, you die. And failure is just part of what you do. You have to accept the fact that sometimes you're going to stuff it up, and sometimes you won't. And so I take on a motto of pretty simple: how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And I keep a little pink elephant on my desk to remind myself of that. And being okay with being vulnerable, and being okay with putting yourself out in front of people, and being okay with being the first to try something. And as long as you embrace all that vulnerability, you're generally going to come up with something pretty cool.